You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, I'm Rich Bendis, CEO of Biohealth Innovation, but more importantly, host of BioTalk. And as we start 2022, we thought we'd lead off with some exciting entrepreneurs who had major events occur at the end of 2021 that a lot of our listeners probably have not heard about yet. But we have had a long-term relationship with this next entrepreneur and his company with BHI. And it's very appropriate. Geoff Lynn, who's the Senior Vice President, Vaccitech, and former CEO of Avidea, get a chance to be on BioTalk early in 2022 based on how he closed his year in 2021. So, Geoff, welcome to BioTalk.
Thanks, Rich. I've enjoyed listening to BioTalk, so it's really a treat for me to be here today.
Well, I think you're going to be a great example for a lot of our emerging entrepreneurs on how you build a successful company. So we're going to learn about that today. And I think one of the best ways to start is you, please, to do a self-introduction of yourself and sort of how you evolved to where you are today. You can talk a little bit about academics, NIH, your industry backgrounds, and sort of the career path that has led you to become a successful biohealth CEO.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I'd like to spend a little bit of time here because I started off as a scientist and I've evolved into a role as an executive. And I'd like to talk about how I got here. And, maybe this is an interesting story for other young entrepreneurs out there. An overarching theme in my training and career has been to use science, which has always been a personal interest of mine, to improve people's lives. I realize this sounds cliche, but it has been absolutely true in my life. I started off in pre-medicine track as an undergrad at Elon University in North Carolina, majoring in chemistry. I love my classes in chemistry, but got involved in scientific research early. And being involved in research really opened up a whole new world where I saw an opportunity to use chemistry, material science research to have a bigger impact on more patients through developing novel medical therapies. Now, this led me to want to become a physician scientist working at the intersection of science and medicine. So I subsequently pursued combined MD PhD training as part of the National Institutes of Health, or NIH's Oxford Cambridge Scholars Program, which is this really unique program that allowed me to pursue medical training at Johns Hopkins and a PhD degree jointly between Oxford and the Vaccine Research Center at the NIH, or National Institutes of Health. After 5 years of this, in 2015, I had developed a very promising vaccine technology with my colleagues there for inducing T-cell immunity, which is around the same time that checkpoint inhibitors and cancer immunotherapies in general that leverage T-cell immunity were gaining more prominence. So this is a really exciting time in the field of oncology, where physicians had determined that you could really improve the lives of patients through this class of therapies called checkpoint inhibitors. And so it was an interesting time for me because in 2015, around 2016, I was supposed to go back to Hopkins and complete medical training. But given all of the excitement and interest and everything that was going on, I knew I needed to take advantage of this opportunity and put my original career plans on hold. Ended up co-founding Avidea and serving as CEO until December of last year when we were acquired by Vaccitech, where I am now in a senior VP role, helping to lead R&D efforts. So in sum, I'm a scientist by passion, but have become an executive out of necessity to move forward this technology that I helped develop as a PhD student.
And with the thousands of scientists we have in our region, there's a small percentage of them that would really like to pursue a commercial career. And, your example is an excellent example of not the only pathway, but a pathway that someone can explore to actually make that transition and take advantage of both the science and the business side of it. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Avidea since you took us to that point. How did you get involved with some of the support entities or individuals that you knew you needed assistance with because you didn't have all of those skill sets being a first-time CEO? So talk a little bit about the history of the company and then sort of where you turned to get advice.
As a PhD student, I traveled back and forth between Oxford and NIH, designing and synthesizing vaccine prototypes in the chemistry lab with Len Seymour at Oxford University, and then evaluating candidates in Bob Sleater's lab at the Vaccine Research Center at the National Institutes of Health. What resulted from this work was an early generation of what we now at Vaccitech refer to as our SnapVax technology platform, which uses self-assembly nanoparticles to make vaccines of precise programmable composition for any application. Now, I realize I'm getting rather technical here, but I really want to stress that the main point here is that we can use this type of synthetic vaccine technology to enable more control, and that by providing more control over the vaccine formulations, we can achieve improvements in manufacturability, and then also potentially improvements in safety and efficacy, where conventional technologies using recombinant techniques or whole organisms may not, be able to address those challenges. So, fast forward to about 2015, 2016, when we got to a point where we had, something really exciting, that we're at this crossroads where we said, okay, well, what do we do with this technology? As I mentioned, I was supposed to go back to complete my medical training, but we had this technology that looked quite promising, and T-cell immunotherapies were gaining a lot of recognition and a lot of interest around that time. And I'd say, when you're a student, you think, okay, I publish some papers, I'll defend my PhD and move to the next phase of my career. But our scientific co-founder, Andrew Ishizuka, and I believed in what we were doing and wanted to see that technology we developed to advance to clinical development. One of the big questions is how do you get started? And I would say, fortunately for us, we were part of an ecosystem here in the capital region that already had some established infrastructure for startups and was growing rapidly. And Rich, obviously, you were a big part of this. You and BHI helped to build this infrastructure, and we are very much a product of that infrastructure you built. And so during that time when we were looking to get started, we started participating in events in the area. We started participating in pitch competitions and other opportunities to learn about how to translate our scientific findings into an actual company. And so really the pivotal moment, and I'll pick up speed here a little bit, the pivotal moment for us to make that transition between really scientific platform to a company was actually at this pitch competition at Johns Hopkins, where we met Matthew Mulvey, former CEO of Benavir, which was acquired by Janssen a couple years back, who was a judge at this pitch competition. And so Matt listened to our pitch. He liked what we were doing and said, hey, I want you to meet some folks over at BioHealth Innovation, including Ram Iyer, who was an entrepreneur in residence or an EIR there, and who's now a CEO of Coro Bio, and said, look, one of the things you need to get started with when forming a company is you need to work with some people who have done it before, who can help you build some of those foundations. And so we met with Ram. Rich, we met with you at BHI. And again, this was some additional validation for us because, we were speaking with folks like yourself who said, hey, we think what you're doing looks interesting. There could be a big opportunity here. And really that opened up a lot of doors for us. And so that was initially how we got introduced to BHI, and happy to elaborate more on the next steps once we, got our foot in the door, how BHI helped us grow from, really a scientific platform into a business.
Well, you were sort of dealing with the A team from BHI, because when Matt Mulvey basically was in a similar situation that you were in, because he took technology out of NYU, moved down to Maryland. He was operating out of Sequela's back office with a bench as he was forming his company. And then we had a chance to meet Matt, and Ram also was involved in working with Matt to help him grow the company and help pivot it actually in their technology to where Janssen division of J&J took an interest in acquiring him. So, I mean, you didn't have a bad set of mentors. And now look at Ram Iyer, who's basically, since he has left BHI as an EIR, entrepreneur in residence, he's on his second company now, had an exit with his first company, and is in a really great position with a major financing with Coro Bio. So you were very fortunate to be exposed to people who had gone through the experience that you were about to take on yourself. So thank you for that background into your connection to BHI. But BHI probably wasn't the only entity that provided support to you in the biohealth capital region. Talk a little bit about how you were embraced by the region and other organizations or entities or individuals that may have helped you during this time frame.
We actually had spun out Avidea as an entity prior to meeting BHI, but had really, only begun to lay the foundations for the company. And so, getting connected with Ram Iyer and BioHealth Innovation was key to us starting to really put a business plan behind this company. And so we worked with Ram on the pitch deck. BHI introduced us to additional support. So as obviously for a small company, you're going to get a lot of help from different groups outside the organization, particularly for intellectual property and legal support. And so we got connected with Michelle Wales of In-House Patent Counsel. And so, she's worked with a number of startups in the area and was really, worked with us until the acquisition. So Michelle was hugely beneficial in getting us to, where we were last year. And that connection was through BHI. Bringing on Ram and getting help from Michelle then allowed us to negotiate licenses to the intellectual property out of Oxford and the NIH, as well as getting additional background IP from other companies. And so that was key to building our IP foundations. And also, Ram was critical to helping us, go out and raise some additional seed funding. So, I'd say BHI was absolutely critical in us laying those foundations. And I just really want to stress how important it is for small companies, for young entrepreneurs to be able to get support from people who have done it before. So Ram and Michelle had both been involved with companies that were successful. And so, they had seen what to do and, we needed that support to get started. And so that was quite early on in around 2016, 2017. But, really our next connection was beginning to work with Johns Hopkins Fast Forward. And they were absolutely critical to open up additional resources for us. So one of the challenges that we found early on was trying to get access to laboratory facilities that had all of the instrumentation that we needed, but we didn't have the funds to pay for that instrumentation. And so Johns Hopkins Fast Forward program was really tremendously helpful. One of the really important things that program provided access to us early on was the instrumentation that we needed to get started. And as a group doing synthetic chemistry, really there's hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in equipment that's needed to do that work. And by being part of Johns Hopkins Fast Forward, we were able to actually access equipment and instruments across the Johns Hopkins campus that's part of the core infrastructure that you have access to as part of a portfolio company there. So that was, I mentioned BHI was critical to us getting set up as a business. Johns Hopkins Fast Forward program was critical to allowing us to grow into a laboratory space that gave us access to all of the equipment that we needed to actually start a lot of the R&D that we needed to get the company off the ground and to get to proof of concept data that we needed to, get to that next phase of growth to attract additional investment.
And I think what's important for listeners to know, and we're talking with Geoffrey Lynn, who's the Senior Vice President at Vaccitech and former founder of Avidea, former co-founder of Avidea, is that you basically have to, as a CEO, know what you know and what you don't know. And so with those things you don't know, it's how do you identify resources that can be advisors to you or supplement your knowledge in those areas which you're just learning as a first-time CEO. And I think that's one of the things that you did well, was accessing resources and taking advantage of those resources in your own backyard, which enabled you to continue to grow the company, but potentially also eliminate some of the needs for major overhead at the beginning until you actually got positioned to where the future direction of that company was going to be. So thank you for what you keep saying about BHI, but it takes a village, and we know that there are a number of people in addition to BHI that are helping you with your success. So let's talk a little bit now about Chapter 2. As you were growing the company, and one of the nice things is that no one said, hey, you got to move to Boston, you got to move to San Francisco to be successful. You're proving that you can do that right now in your own backyard there with the resources. How did you get introduced to a potential partner like Vaccitech as you were going through your journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I guess there's a couple points that I'd like to hit on here. So one, to finish out the earlier question about what resources here in Maryland, I also want to say, at a state level, there's state programs that we took advantage of, tax credits for our investors. So those were hugely helpful for bringing investment. I just want to stress that the states put in a lot of programs that have been critical for us getting started. There's also TEDCO and Maryland Innovation Initiative. We've been able to take advantage of those a little bit later on in our development, but just really want to stress that there's organizations such as BHI, Hopkins, but then also at the state level that are hugely helpful for these companies. So
did you do any SBIR financing?
We didn't do an SBIR. We were able to secure a different funding mechanism through NIH, but SBIR was something that we certainly went after.
Okay. You're right. The state has significant programs. The Biotechnology Tax Credit Program and TEDCO have supported numerous companies in their early stages. And, the Investor Tax Credit Program is somewhat unique. There aren't many states or regions in the country that have that will actually write a check back to an investor in an early stage company. So congratulations on taking advantage of that program.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. And I'd say the BITSI, as it's called, was critical for us securing some of our early funding from angel investors. So really want to play up the importance of that to us early on. But to your question about, growing a young company here in Maryland, I would say that there was a lot of pressure early on. When we were out pitching to biotech VCs based in Boston and San Francisco area, we did have opportunities to raise a Series A to, really get a substantial investment. But, we really decided to go a different route with the company. We viewed Avidea as a company that had really interesting platform technology. And so rather than, raising a large Series A early on, we focused on, earlier R&D efforts to determine exactly what our platform technology could do prior to going out there and raising a larger Series A, focusing on maybe one or two product candidates, right? Because as you move towards clinical development, you really need to have additional focus on products. But early on, we wanted to explore what our platform technology could do. And really our approach was to, rather than go out and raise a large Series A from institutional investors, was to determine if we could actually raise enough funds through different business development partnerships with, I would say, small and mid-sized biotech, as well as publicly traded companies, including, mid-sized biotechs and large pharma. And that was really the main means for Avidea financing itself over the last few years. So we had a seed round, about 1.5 million, but then raised an additional 6.5 million through different partnerships. And that's what allowed us to build out our platform technology, de-risk, and was also in part how we initially got connected with Vaccitech. And there's multiple different commonalities and I would say connections to Vaccitech, which I can come back to. But really, the way that we had focused on financing ourselves as a platform technology company was in part what initially, led us down this path that led to the acquisition.
When you talk about these partnerships, talk about the manner that funding came in. Talk about how much of it is really equity-oriented financing versus partnership or royalty or licensing opportunities in these partnerships. And, it's a unique way to finance the company without having to do traditional venture capital equity as you're trying to grow. So talk, briefly a little bit about some of the way those funds came into the company and what did you have to give up to get them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And early on, we were looking at the different funding mechanisms. And, as I alluded to, for venture capital companies, the platform story resonated with some venture capital firms. Others wanted to see, specific products that they could be excited about. But the other alternative avenue that we decided to pursue early on was to actually find out how we could deploy our platform technology to, fulfill needs of other companies. So we were, broadly speaking, had a platform technology for inducing T-cell immunity. Now, T-cell immunity can be used for applications in cancer, chronic infections, for autoimmune diseases. And so what we did is we talked to various biotechs and pharma and tried to understand what their needs were. And what we did is, in these scientific discussions, identified potential, research collaborations, potential clinical programs that we could go down that would bring in some non-dilutive funding for Avidea, but that would also be potentially a joint development venture with these different companies. And so The big pros and cons of this route of funding, though, is, as you know, Rich, is, on one hand, it's nice because it's non-dilutive. There's validation because oftentimes you're working with a partner who brings a lot of that external validation. But the potential downside is you're committing a lot of your own resources to developing a program for your partner. And the upside is typically lower, so there's less interest from your own investors. But you can, there's different ways to try to, limit the exposure there by making sure that the funds that you get from the partner can actually offset some of your external costs, maybe bring on new hires, which is, certainly a route we took. But then also the other challenge is, how do you slice up your intellectual property, right? So whenever you undertake a partnership, that partner is usually going to want an exclusive license to what you're developing with them. And so, we were very cognizant of, how these partnerships could affect our IP portfolio, and, tried to, limit risk as much as possible there while retaining most of the intellectual property pie, if you will. But, really found that as a great way to get funds, get validation, but then also enable us to still move our own programs forward.
As you started to say before, Jeff, as you were looking for strategic partners, that was one of the ways in which you may have come in contact with Vaccitech, which there might have been multiple common connections. So, we talk about how many degrees of separation are, but maybe on this one, there were many 1 degrees of separation that brought you to them. So talk a little bit about your introduction to Vaccitech and how that process evolved sort of in evaluation of what that partnership could really look like.
Yeah, it's funny. There are a lot of connections between the two organizations. We knew Bill Enright, Vaccitech's CEO, from working with him here in the capital region. And both Andrew Ishizuka and I knew the Jenner Institute scientists at Oxford who spun out Vaccitech from our time working there. Andrew was actually a PhD student in the Jenner Institute and was very familiar with their technology and, actually knows a lot of the scientists there. But I'd say, really was a more typical BD process that actually led us to a collaboration with Vaccitech that eventually led to the merger. And so, the timing of these discussions actually worked out very well for both companies. So last summer, Avidea was at a crossroad. We were progressing towards a Series A. I mentioned we were a platform company, but now we had identified lead candidates for both our cancer vaccine program as well as our immune tolerance program. And we had term sheets to move forward with a Series A. But we also had various collaborations with other mid-sized biotech companies evaluating opportunities for BD deals, as I mentioned. And Vaccitech was one of these companies where we were evaluating opportunities. And around last summer, we had generated some really exciting data showing that the combination of our vaccine technologies led to improved responses as compared to either alone for cancer treatment. And that had us going down this path of, hey, well, maybe we should do a clinical collaboration. And as we went deeper into that process, we started exploring, well, what more can we do together? And that's really, I would say that the impetus for our discussions is, starting off discussing, hey, should we do a clinical collaboration? But then, as we went further into that process, we saw that there was just a tremendous potential in bringing these two companies together.
And you mentioned Bill Enright, and I just had an opportunity to do a BioTalk with Bill this week as well. And I don't know if you know it or not, but his wife, Renee, helped me start BioHealth Innovation when we got it started all the way back in 2011, 2012. And I met Bill through that process. So you're right. And then also Bill has been a serial entrepreneur for over 3 decades and watched this region evolve over the last 30 years. And so really, I'm certain would give you a great perspective, not only just looking at the partnership that you were trying to form, but also probably providing advice as a entrepreneurial CEO, as he had been in that situation many times as you were cultivating your relationship with Vaccitech.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's inspiring to see what Bill has done in building Altimmune, bringing them public, and then now doing the same with Vaccitech last year. He's an excellent biotech CEO, but then also specialized in the vaccine space. And it was really validating for us as we were having the discussions, because we really saw a big opportunity to combine our teams and technologies. And, Bill saw something there too. And being an experienced CEO like him, that means a lot to us. And I think gave us a lot of validation for moving forward.
Talk about the deciding factor that actually said, let's do this. I mean, because you had many alternatives on the table before deciding to get fully in bed with Vaccitech. What were the synergistic reasons for doing the merger? And you and your partner, when did you say, hey, this is the right thing, let's just do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's one as we were exploring the opportunity, it just became so obvious to us that this was such a perfect fit that we had to take this opportunity and really make sure that the merger was successful. And I'll touch on a few reasons why. And really it comes down to, there's a lot of overlap of the teams and technologies, but there's just also a tremendous amount of complementarity that really helps reduce the overall risk, of combining these two entities together. So scientifically, both teams are expert in T-cell vaccines and immunotherapies, which means we speak a lot of the same language and we're aligned in terms of objectives and how to achieve them. Also, from a product development perspective, our companies were both focused on T-cell based vaccines for cancer and chronic infectious disease. So, you can see there's already a lot of common ground for the organizations. Though while there's a lot of overlap, there was also a lot of unique complementarity and differences between our teams and technologies. With our synthetic vaccine technology, we can actually expand the indications that Vaccitech can move into, including for applications and tolerance for treating autoimmune diseases. Now, a concern would be, whoa, this is spreading things too thin. We're going after cancer, chronic infections, and now autoimmune diseases. But I'd really stress that going into autoimmune diseases leverages all of the existing expertise and infrastructure of both companies. So, looking at this in totality, it just seemed like such an obvious decision to try to bring together these teams.
And as we look to the future, and the decision-making process you made seems like a very good one based on the alternatives you had. But, sometimes egos get in the way. And you've been a CEO now for an emerging bio company. And all of a sudden, you merge with Vaccitech, a larger company, and you become a senior vice president with Vaccitech, and you're not the CEO anymore. Talk a little bit about what that new transition's like, and did that have any impact on the decision process about you're not being number one versus being, number whatever in a larger company?
That's a great question. I will say being part of a small company and, being able to make decisions quickly, I would say it was, quite a nice experience. But the main driver for me has been to operate in a company as the vehicle to advance promising therapies to patients. And so I really have no ego about the role. And I'm delighted to actually step out of the CEO role and focus a little bit more on R&D. And, I think part of the comfort in making that decision and, moving into a role that's more focused on R&D is having absolute faith in the leadership in Vaccitech. So, they have a excellent executive team, and I'm fully aligned with their mission and their capabilities. And so I think the other thing is Bill is the type of CEO where he's approachable, and that carries across the organization. And so I think feeling like you're heard, feeling like you can have these kind of open discussions is also quite important to make sure that you're able to make a difference in the organization. And I think they are that kind of organization, and that helps a lot. But no ego in having to maintain the mantle of CEO. Happy to fall under Bill's direction here.
Right. It's nice not to have to worry about making payrolls and raising money anymore, right? And that's somebody else's responsibility. The other thing, it's probably nice to have somebody that you report to or that's a CEO that's 30 minutes away rather than a couple thousand miles away. And I'm sure Bill is very happy about having another resource in his region, in his backyard, that he can interact with to help continue to grow this ecosystem, but also talk about the transatlantic or cross-Atlantic opportunities to take advantage of resources on both sides of the pond. So in closing here, Jeff, I think that you have some words of wisdom that you might be able to share to other emerging biohealth entrepreneurs, especially in our region. So what would you like to offer as your words of wisdom or advice to people who may have been in your past position before the Vaccitech merger and still have the same opportunity to potentially grow and evolve as you have?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm qualified to be offering advice to other CEOs or emerging company CEOs, but I'll give it a try here. I'd say, there's probably a couple lessons that I found most valuable. And, one of those lessons was to listen to the advice of others and take that advice, but certainly be open-minded about, how it applies to your unique situation, because every company is different. And I think, there's a couple, things that we always heard. One was raise as much money as you can whenever you can. And we also always got a lot of pushback from different groups say, oh, we hate platform companies. They're hard to raise money for. And it's true. Both of those points I think are true, but they're also not true. And I think having a nuanced outlook on it is important for a CEO, because you have to assess everything internal to your organization as well as external factors and make decisions. And in responding to that advice we got, we could have raised more money earlier, but it would have hindered our ability to pivot. It would have prevented us from moving into this merger that we're in now, because I think we would have had different expectations from our investors and from an organization perspective. So I would say that's one important piece. And the other is we quite liked having a platform technology company. It allowed us to find, financing from a number of different resources, whereas if we focus on a single product, that has its advantages, but there's also advantages to platform companies as well. So I'd say you're going to get a lot of advice. You're going to hear a lot of dogma. I just stress that some of it's true, but it may not be true for you. And so I think you just have to keep an open mind and be quite flexible and take a nuanced perspective on all of this. I think those are probably some of the big ones. I don't know if you want to push back on that, but
No, I'm not going to push back, because I've actually told some companies and entrepreneurs, the money's there, take it, because you never know when you're going to get it again. Or, you never know what's going to happen to the company from the time when you're going to need money the next time. But yet, at the end of the day, you have to listen to your gut. And you're a scientist, so generally you work with data. So I would imagine you went through a decision-making process where you looked at all of the data and the facts in front of you and tried to actually make, quantifiable decisions based on the data you had available to you. And then ultimately your gut did make the final decision about what you were going to do, which to this point has been right. But there are other people who maybe would have gone in that same direction, and then all of a sudden their technology or their science dies in the vine. They don't have enough money to pivot, and they really haven't been able to pivot. So I compliment you on, the decision process you went through to get Avidea to where it was so attractive to Vaccitech. And I'm sure that they're going to take advantage of your decision-making ability to help guide them in the future with their pipeline.
I hope so, Rich, and thanks for that.
Yeah, so I want to thank Geoff Lynn, Senior Vice President for Vaccitech and former CEO of Avidea, for being on BioTalk today. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to be one of your partners. My only regret is that we didn't have a little bigger piece of the pie as you continue to grow. But we appreciate what you've done for this region. And we also appreciate your commitment and Bill Enright's commitment to keep you in the region. Because, this is an example of a success story of an international company merging and acquiring a biohealth capital region company. And there has been no commitment to say you need to move to the UK in order for us to work together. So I think they understand that it's better to leverage the resources on both sides of the Atlantic, and it's going to be a much stronger company for Vaccitech. So, Geoff, thank you for what you have done. We wish you the best of luck as the Senior VP of Vaccitech. And maybe a year from now, we'll have you come back and talk to the other entrepreneurs about how the first year's transition has gone from an independent entrepreneur to being a part of a larger biotech entity.
It would be an absolute pleasure, Rich. And I want to thank you and BHI again for, helping build the ecosystem in this area and, really being a major part of Avidea's story. So thank you, Rich.
Thank you very much, Geoff.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.